Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our brand new movie review. We're going to take a look at a very good movie. We're going to take a look at a movie by Olivier Assayas entitled Personal Shopper. And I want to just have a few preliminary comments before we jump into the actual review. What is being addressed in this film is the question of is there an afterlife? Is there a realm of spirit? And one character, Maureen, is on a journey to discover through her own self-identity if this spiritual reality does exist. And it's not till we get to the very end of the film that the author introduces the portal to the realm of spirit. And for the author-director, Assayas, that is the literary poetry of Victor Hugo. He becomes the portal to the realm of spiritual existence, which is announced toward the end of the film. Now, Victor Hugo believed in God, but he attacked organized religion. He didn't care for organized religion. His daughter drowned. It suffered a terrible loss there. He became the guardian of his grandchildren, and he reflected that struggle in his poetry. He addressed human identity and reshaping human identity and reshaping human deformity. Just remember his Hunchback of Notre Dame. And he addresses central themes like determinism and spiritual deformity. And we're going to find symbolic instances of this being addressed in this film as well. So just keep that in mind, because Victor Hugo comes up at the end of the film, but it's good for us to have at least a hint of where we're going at the beginning. Let's go to block one and begin. It is a play in 3 acts. I've subtitled it The Sign of Jonah. Act 1, The Descent into Hades. It is a play in 3 acts consisting of 1, the descent into Hades, 2, the conflict between the flesh and spirit, and 3, the dialogue and the goal of self-conscious identity. Now, we need to look at the importance of scene 1, because the film begins with Maureen, who represents every woman, every man, every human being, entering Hades, the realm of the dead. Hades is always described as having iron bars and a chain and a lock. Hades is symbolized in the film by the abandoned house once belonging to Maureen's deceased twin, Lewis. Maureen enters the house and immediately walks through the darkness to reach the patio of light. This introduces us to the theme of the film. One must pass through Hades in order to reach spiritual light. And Lara, who symbolizes mediation, doesn't go with Maureen initially, because Maureen must take this journey toward identity on her own. Now, the film does have Judeo-Christian elements, but it is not a religious film. It is primarily a philosophical film, and the philosophical theme is French postmodernism rewrites German Hegelian idealism. And we'll see this as we go through the review. Now, postmodern quest for identity. The author and director has already told us that this film is to be understood as a visualization of Maureen's subjectivity. The objective incidents are taking place in Maureen's mind, a mind that is not being assisted with the symbolic deformed heart. It is another symbolic element. After the initial light of the patio, we are cast into Hades. Initially, Maureen feels the presence of spirit, but she tells Lara it might take both of us to make contact. Lara symbolizes mediation. Now, the first sign of escape from Hades. The first Christian element is the etched cross on the wall of the descending staircase, symbolizing Christ's descent into Hades. Lara says she sees the cross along with Maureen. And then we have a scene where we get introduced to Hilma Klint, the abstract artist, because we're told that Maureen is told that her art is a portal to spirit. Aesthetics becomes a portal to spirit. That is the hypothesis posited by the filmmaker. And this means that film as art also functions as a portal to spirit. Next, we are introduced to the smartphone, and it's critical that we understand the smartphone in this film. Don't look at it objectively. Look at it as subjectivity. We know that from the director-author. Because it equals Maureen's self-consciousness throughout the film. It's a unique way, and I think it's a great thing to do. It really does work. But it's a way for us, the viewer, to participate in the developing, ongoing self-conscious identity of Maureen, the main character. So the smartphone and the dialogue on the smartphone will equal Maureen's self-consciousness throughout the entire film. She searches Clint's portal of aesthetics. And that's when we make the transition to Act 2. Then we make the transition to Act 2. Okay, Block 2, Act 2. The conflict between the portal of aesthetics, which leads to spirit, and the realm of the flesh. The conflict. Being a personal shopper represents the side of Maureen's life as empty surface reality, represented by the supermodel Kira, but even finitude is an invisible reality. Kira is not at home frequently. She leaves notes. But then we have a scene where Maureen returns to her own space, and finitude as an empty surface reality. Reaching her own space, Maureen starts thumbing through Clint's book. She starts thumbing through Clint's portal of aesthetics to reach spirit, and immediately skepticism enters the scene. Her boyfriend Gary calls. He wants Maureen to visit him in the mountain retreat of Oman, Muscat, and Gary questions Maureen's supposed spiritual experience at Lewis's abandoned house. Now we get into the area of temptation. While shopping, Maureen is tempted to try on Kira's clothing, and she literally does walk in her shoes. The temptation is further emphasized by Maureen standing in for Kira's photo shoot. And then we flash to the doctor scene. We're giving an insight into Maureen's malformed heart, which symbolizes a lack of a spiritual base. There's a malformation, symbolically a spiritual malformation. A flashback to the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Malformation is addressed in the film. This malformation symbolically is you're a malformed human being if you're living according to surface reality. If that is your reality, that's a malformation. You are less than genuine, you are less than an authentic human being if you neglect the realm of spirit, and if you live according to empty surface reality and egoism. That is not just a fallen humanity, that's a deformed reality, a deformed humanity. So we do get that insight into the malformed heart. And then Ingo, the self-destructive side of finitude. Ingo confesses, he's the boyfriend of Kira, he confesses that reality is without love. It's just physical. So he has a malformation himself. There's no reality in their relationship. It's as empty as any egoism would be. There's no love. There's no depth. It is a malformation of a spiritual heart. We also get introduced to the oath. Maureen announces that her and Lewis made a promise to each other that whoever died first would try to contact the other from the other side of death, and if it exists, the other side of afterlife. And this actually creates anticipation on the part of Maureen. She anticipates a sign of afterlife from Lewis. She anticipates, this is important, this shows you the power of promise. She anticipates a sign of afterlife from Lewis. She is sharpening her intuition to be ready to receive this sign of an afterlife from Lewis. Anticipating the sign of afterlife. Subjectively, Maureen must be spiritually tuned to a vibe we hear. Open to the realm of spirit in an intuitive way. Now here you go. The final trip to Lewis's abandoned house takes place. A second cross appears on a table, but then we have the sign of Jonah as a proof of afterlife. Hades vomits out Lewis, that is, Hades vomits out the ectoplasm, and Maureen and Lewis both are freed from Hades. We're going to learn later in the film that she herself is freed from Hades in this moment as well. But the only proof, is the sign of Jonah. You know, when Christ was questioned and the scribes and Pharisees said, give us proof, give us proof, give us a sign, prove this reality that you are announcing. And Christ says, the only proof you get, the only sign you get, is the sign of Jonah. In this film, and like I said, you know, this is not a religious film, but it does have Judeo-Christian elements in it, and this is one of those elements. It's because Jonah was vomited out of Hades. You know, when he cries out from Hades in the book of Jonah. And so here we have the vomiting out of the ectoplasm, which is a key moment. And it becomes really the proof of afterlife. Maureen and Lewis are free from Hades. In the very next scene, we jump to the smartphone. And we read on the smartphone, I know you and you know me. I mean, that's very obvious. I know you and you know me. That is dialogue. That is self-consciousness. That is the immediate clue to the participating audience that the smartphone will represent Maureen's self-conscious dialogue. Because the first two statements are, I know you and you know me. The final journey to self-conscious identity is ready to take place. We move on to Act 3. Okay, Act 3, Reaching Self-Conscious Identity. The smartphone episodes are a visible reflection of Maureen's self-consciousness. For the viewer, we read, I know you and you know me. The journey to London is a journey towards self-consciousness. Self-questioning begins with, are you real? Are you alive? Are you dead? Are you Lewis? After this internal questioning, Maureen actually breaks down crying. Brokenness must be an essential step to reaching self-conscious identity. You have to break that false self before you can proceed. So brokenness is an essential moment in the film. After brokenness comes crisis. In London, she tries on Kira's silk organza harness. The unmasking of the false self begins. Dying to the old self. The key question arises on the smartphone. Do you want to be someone else? She answers honestly, yes, but I don't know who. Now we reach confession. Maureen confesses, very important here in the film, she has been the person who runs and hides from her true self. She has been the person who runs and hides from her true self. You have to pay attention to the smartphone in the film. Now we reach transition. Returning to Paris. Back at Kira's, Maureen bares herself and confronts Kira's self-image. She gets on Kira's computer, and it's just loaded with egoism, just images of herself. Images of Kira are on Kira's laptop. So it's just empty egoism. We see Maureen naked with the harness on. The soul needs release. Dressed as Kira, Maureen enters the realm of self-pleasure and egoism. What happens? The true self goes to sleep. Next, the pendulum swings back to Lara's new house. We reach confession of the lost female. The Maureen-Lara dialogue. Maureen announces to Lara that she, not he, she vomited this ectoplasm and left. And Maureen confesses, this female seemed lost. Well, that's Maureen. That's a self-awareness moment. Lara confesses, and Maureen agrees, I'm ready for life. I want life. We transition now to the acknowledgement, now I want life. The new portal. And here you go. After all this journey, Lara tells Maureen to investigate Victor Hugo on YouTube, the French poet of the 1800s, and his symbolic poetry. We enter the realm of poetic symbolism. On YouTube, the poet declares that the soul must pass through death and resurrection. Now, Maria has one last visit to Kira's world where she confesses that she feels ridiculous. She feels ashamed. So it's a key transition moment. Now, this room 724 in the hotel becomes a spiritual intersection where self confronts self. The room is reserved in Maureen's name. And now here we go. We reach death and resurrection toward the end of the film. Maureen finds Kira brutally slain. We learn later that Ingo, the boyfriend, is the one who killed her. Finite egoism is empty and it is self-destructive. Ingo kills Kira. Now remember, this is Maureen's subjectivity. This is Maureen dying to the old self. Look at it as visible subjectivity, visible self-awareness. Maureen dies to the old self. Now, resurrection. Maureen initiates a call to Gary. She says, I will travel to Oman, to Muscat, to the mountain retreat. But Gary, he still is the skeptical postmodern man. But Maureen confesses, I want to leave Paris. I hate it. We reach the first epiphany in the film. Maureen visits Lara's new house, where her new boyfriend, Erwin, also resides now. Erwin tells Maureen they must free themselves from Lewis and his metaphysics, but put into practice is spiritual freedom. A floating glass appears behind Maureen after Erwin leaves. Spiritual presence is emerging. Now we close out with arrival at Muscat, Oman. Maureen reaches spiritual awareness. Maureen reaches true self-identity. Her self-knowing question is, we see another one of those floating glasses, is it you, Lewis, or is it just me? And we don't end with an answer, we end with a question. And that's the way the author wants it. That's the way the filmmaker wants it. He wants the audience to question themselves. How are you going to define spiritual identity in a postmodern world that denies metaphysics? French postmodernism rewrote German idealism and declared that the only path we can take in philosophy is to begin with phenomenology and to end with phenomenology. Metaphysics is dead. That's the first premise of French postmodernism. So we end with a question. How are you going to break out of your own malformed self? This malformed self that is living according to egoism and surface reality. How are you going to break out of it? How are you going to find that your own mountain retreat of meditation and prayer and seeking and questioning, self-conscious questioning? Because we're told in the film, we have to take up the Victor Hugo perspective. And that's given to us toward the end of the film. But we end up going full circle because Victor Hugo did believe in a spiritual realm. Victor Hugo did not appreciate organized religion. He even attacked organized religion. But he believed in a spiritual realm. He believed in a living God. He suffered tremendous loss when his daughter drowned. He wrote The Hunchback of Notre Dame on human deformity needing escape from determinism. Human deformity that can find hope through sacrificial love. Tremendous poet, tremendous writer. And we're going to wrap up there. That's, about 24 minutes? That's not bad. Anyway, this film will be appreciated by anyone who appreciates literary poetry, anyone who appreciates the philosophical mind, anyone who recognizes that French postmodernism is not the final word. French postmodernism is not the final word. And I think it's a tremendous film. It's certainly not for everybody, because I think it's visual poetry. I think this film is actually visual poetry. So I give it 5 stars. I definitely recommend it. And I accept the proof of the sign of Jonah. I agree with the filmmaker here. I accept the sign of Jonah. as far as I'm concerned. Beautiful film that is a visual expression of literary poetry. That's going to wrap up a review of Personal Shopper, a film by Olivier Assayas.